Now to welcome you to Driven 2020 is BP3's CEO, Scott Francis.
Let me unmute myself. Most famous comment in 2020. Can you hear me now? So thank you, Krista. Welcome to Driven 2020, everyone, for day two. As you know, Driven is 5 days of some of the best minds in automation, talking about the 5 key themes that we see in the automation market: artificial intelligence, RPA, or robotic process automation, general process automation, application modernization, and enterprise user experience design. And really excited to share the content with you today that we're going to discuss. I encourage you to join the Slack domain that Krista mentioned, because it's always great to have the sort of informal banter while the session's going on or afterward. And I know David and the other folks who join us will be available for Q&A in Slack afterward as well. Also, you might have noticed that the new Forrester wave for digital process automation service providers, Q3 2020, was released just last week. If you didn't notice, allow me to call your attention to it. If you go to our website at www.bp3.com, bp-3.com, you can find a link to register and download that report in full. We are really honored, our team is really honored to be included in the evaluation, and even more so to be named a leader in this wave. And when you choose to work with BP3, you're choosing to work with the best at what we do. And this kind of recognition really only comes with working with amazing clients, team members, and partners. And let me just say thank you once again. Really, really excited for our team. And finally, we are ready to start day two, focused on RPA, robotic process automation, the hottest of hot areas in enterprise software. But how do we make the most of it and get the most value out of the hype cycle? Well, let's find out, shall we? I will hand it off to David Bracanecki, who runs our European business. David, take it away. Everyone else, enjoy Driven 2020, day two.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Just give me a second to get the screen sharing working. There we go. I'm very excited to host the RPA Day and to bring you through. I think we've gathered together some great content for you today. I'm going to begin and end the day talking a little bit about the current state as we see it from a BP3 perspective of the RPA market. I'm going to end the day talking about some of the things we think and some of the future directions of the RPA market as we see them. In between that, though, is the bits I'm probably really excited about. We have a great panel of some of our RPA customers at various different stages of their journeys and different levels of maturity. And we have a good demo for some of the concepts that both we talked about yesterday on the RPA Day and how they fit into the RPA environment, as well as some of the new concepts I'll talk about in the current state. So without further ado, shall we get started? It used to be, when we talked about RPA at Driven, that we really had to define the term because it was sort of a niche technology 3 or 4 years ago. I've sort of left this slide in to make sure and level set that everyone knows what we're talking about. So RPA, when we talk about it, we talk about types of software that are emulating the way human beings do repetitive tasks. They're largely designed to free up employees from performing higher value work. Probably the best way I think about I've found to explain RPA to people who don't understand it is it's basically an integration technology, but it uses the same UI that human beings use. So it types in the same fields that you as a user use. It clicks on the same buttons, and because of that, you don't need. It has several interesting dimensions as an enterprise software product. One of the most notable dimensions of it is that because it uses the software tools and applications the same way end users do, that business users quite often understand how precisely the technology works in a way that they don't when you're writing code that's accessing an API. And that has some interesting dynamics about the way business and tech can work together on RPA products. But perhaps we'll stop there for a second. And before we kick off into the main content, let's start with a poll. So. think you can probably see there that you know, inside this group, 75%, unsurprisingly, you've come to an automation conference, are using RPA in your business today. And I mean, that's pretty much a very popular trend we see now. Again, RPA is, as Scott said, the hottest of the hot in automation today. It's one of the top technologies people are asking us about, or asking us to help them figure out where it fits into their overall architecture. So, if I step back from that and maybe just start with how does the RPA market look? So these are some numbers from the Everest Group. They're a research consultancy that specialize a lot in RPA. Estimated 2020 market size between $2 and $2.5 billion, with a 70 or 80% compound annual growth rate over the last 3 years. Pretty startlingly fast numbers. It's a pretty big market. The growth rates in particular are impressive. I mean, I think in 2019, Gartner said that RPA was the fastest growing sector of all enterprise software. And it's a big market, but also if you look across the vendors in the various regions they have listed here, it's also a fairly stable market, right? There is a big three vendor set: Automation Anywhere, UiPath, and Blue Prism. That's the majority of the market. That's where the center of gravity in the market is. You have another set of vendors, WorkFusion, Pega, NICE in particular, maybe, that really have specific characteristics or qualities which make them incredibly attractive to certain types of customers. But there's a long tail of customers, and even since this research came out 6 months ago or so, you see some of these vendors on the slides in front of you here. Another Monday, Softmotive, were both acquired and no longer exist. But this market view, and I guess around this, this is the software market, the professional services, and the other ancillary markets which you'd expect to surround sort of an enterprise software product and ecosystem. They all exist, and they sort of operate at the same levels that you'd expect. Certainly the RPA professional services market isn't quite at 3 to 5 times the software, but that's normal, and it's sort of trending there. It certainly appears as if it'll stabilize at about that level. But inside this tidy view, what's kind of interesting is that this tidy view is hardly ever how people come to RPA, or increasingly come to us to ask about how the RPA market works. Because RPA is actually part of a bigger automation market. And in this context, inside this bigger automation market, where you have workflow technology, case management solutions, you have things like MuleSoft, which you can use to do integration and can solve some of the same use cases. You have open source tools, and you have commercial platforms. You have consolidated vendors like Pega and IBM, who have products across almost all the areas of automation, all the way down to sort of, on the other end of the spectrum, applications like Microsoft and AWS, which might provide only one service on the AWS platform, which could be qualified really as automation, but still as a player in this overall market. The automation market space for technology is a very confused place. And RPA is one part of it. So increasingly, the challenge that businesses have isn't just, should I buy RPA, or how does RPA fit into my enterprise architecture? Increasingly, the challenge, and particularly in the pandemic, with the pressure COVID is putting on all of our businesses, the challenge is, I want more efficiency, I want to be more effective, and I feel like I need to bring automation, and my competitors are bringing automation into their businesses. And how do I do that? Well, when you're talking about how to bring automation into your business, you're not looking at this really tidy, nicely organized RPA market with sort of leaders and followers and different technology capabilities that's growing at a nice tidy CAGR. You're looking at this bigger, messy automation market. And for most organizations, you are already going to own some of the tools on this slide. So you're going to also be grappling with questions like, should I use the thing I own, which isn't the perfect technology fit for the use case I have, or should I go and buy a new technology? And should I pick something else off the menu of automation technology, as it were? And that's a question we've seen, and we've been consistently trying to help our customers with over the last 2 or 3 years. And to help them, we've worked through a automation categorization, a way to think about that model, to reason through it, and to classify and group things. The core of it is what you see here: task flow and decisions. That's the core, core of that categorization. And the first thing I'd say to you when you look at this and you think about the categorization model this way is the automation. We haven't put technologies up there. I haven't written BPM or case management systems or ticketing systems. I haven't written RPA solutions or integration tools. One of the keys to the categorization method is, rather than starting with the technology, let's start with the use cases. And there's two good reasons for that. One is, if you understand the problem, you can understand and make sure you're finding the right solution. But the second is that as soon as you, when you go to the business users, when they say we need to automate in the shared service center, you can talk to them using this framework. You can find the use cases, but you can and after you get the use cases, you can then apply technology. These use cases, this terminology should be things which business users can adapt to. You don't have to teach them what robotics are. You don't have to teach them that some task use cases are robotics use cases and others are ones that you should script with Ansible. You can deal with that offline. The most important thing, the first indication of being successful in any new automation program, find the right use cases. Find use cases which are going to make a real difference to your business. So if you think about how to reason through these, we start with task automations. So what's a task automation? Routine work, normally work done by one person in one sitting. It's data entry. Usually data entry, it can be part of a more complicated task. It's often rekeying the same data into multiple systems, or taking data that's in one system and then having to rekey it into another system. You find it, it's easy. Normally you can find it anytime you have people keying into multiple systems is a good place. If you have large spreadsheets, Word documents that are being used to store information because you're talking to a customer on the phone and you can't key it into the three systems all at the same time. So you write it down on a piece of paper or you type it into a notepad on the side. And then after that call, you then actually finish up and type all the data into all the different systems. That's a task automation to fix. Reporting, if someone is manually compiling Excel reports, pulling data from multiple systems, putting them in Excel, reformatting that Excel spreadsheet, that's a task automation. That's a task automation use case. The business case and the ROI around task automation is normally done by measuring working hours saved. What you're doing is someone has a routine part of their job and they're keying a bunch of data and moving data around your systems. The human is being the integration, swivel chair integration, and you're replacing them with a robot. That human does 50% of their job is routine manual work. If you replace that with a robot, you save half an FTE. You can then repurpose that. You can rationalize your headcount, or you can repurpose that person to higher value work, retrain them, and reallocate them to other places in your organization. There are some task automations, obviously. What you find when you do task automation, though, is sometimes the business case around task automation is built on compliance. Certainly, if you have you're in a regulated industry and you're typing a lot of data into your systems, what you'll find is human beings are actually really bad, even at copying and pasting. Hitting Control-C, Control-V all day. They're gonna copy the wrong data. They're gonna miss the last vowel or the first vowel on the thing on a name when they copied it from one system to another. They're gonna misspell something when they type between two different systems. Robots don't. Robots will always copy the data with 100% integrity. If you've written the code right, you've tested the code, and the RPA bot, it will move it. So you can often, with task automation, see a dramatic reduction in error rate. And that's another way that in task automation, you can make a strong business case around investing in this kind of technology. The second technology that we talk about in the automation market is flow. And flow technology is orchestration of work across different participants or silos. It's constructed, the work is always constructed of several tasks. If you come from a workflow background or a case management background, if you have a Lean Six Sigma background, flow is the technology which you're using to orchestrate your end-to-end value chains. It's a very different looking for flow opportunities than looking for tasks. So if task opportunities, one of the best ways to find a pool of use cases around task automation is look for big labor groups. Do you have 20 or 30 people doing the same job? If you have 100 people doing the same job and I can automate 1% of that person's job, I can save you an FTE worth of labor. Flow automation is you're looking not for large labor groups, but you're looking for lots of handoffs, lots of work being passed between different SMEs or different specialists. And it's in those handoffs that work gets lost. It sits in my email inbox, waiting for my approval, or I send it off to my boss and he's on holiday and he doesn't get to it in a timely fashion, and I end up missing the SLA across the whole process. So that orchestration, instead of looking for large labor groups all doing the same job as we do with task automation, with flow automation, you tend to find the best use cases where you have very small labor groups which hand the work off between them. If you have teams which are geographically separated but doing the same job, those are often great use cases where you definitely find task automation. What you'll probably find is that one group in one office is working full time, and the other group has spare capacity. If you could just balance the work between the two, if you could see it between the two, you could balance the work, you could hit your SLAs better, you could reduce wait times on the end-to-end value stream. So flow automation, very different dynamics. Another good indicator of where to find flow automation is really around if you're using spreadsheets or email to send tasks to people or to track work that's being done, normally because your core system of records, your ERP system, is not configured or customized correctly. So you're working around it, and therefore you're keeping track of things in a spreadsheet, and you're spreading that spreadsheet around the team to figure out who has what job so you can make your SLA. That's a great use case for putting flow automation in, for tracking that work, for understanding it, making sure you hit those deadlines. The final category of automation in space is decision automation. And really, this is what Tom and Chris were talking about yesterday. It's using rules or using technology to simulate human judgment, right? And there's a couple real ways that that decision automation really drives a business case, if you're looking for examples of where to start or where to find these kinds of use cases. One of them is if you have to make technologies, decisions, humans have to make judgment at scale and at speed, right? It used to be all insurance and bank was manually underwritten. You'd call up and an underwriter you'd talk to someone, you'd fill out a questionnaire, it would go to a human being who'd make an underwriting decision. In the old Lloyd syndicates, they'd sign it with a quill pen. But obviously, when you move to a modern world, you buy insurance online, you buy it through the internet. The technology, the pricing engine makes a decision about who's eligible for insurance, what the price of that insurance is. And that happens really in real time, right? So when you need to make decisions quickly and at scale, then obviously you need some sort of decision technology behind that. But another good use case for simulating human judgment is just looking for opportunities where you need consistency in judgment. So again, if you go to regulatory and compliance, if there's some famous studies in the U.S. where they looked at statistical studies of when people were granted parole given similar characteristics, and what they found was that if you got the judge right after lunch, you're more likely to get parole than right before lunch. So, human beings, even given the same piece of information, being given the same information to reason against, and the same set of guidelines as to how to score that use case or that scenario, they'll come to different judgments based on the fact that they're hungry, they're tired, based on the fact that they're having a good day, they're having a bad day, they got a flat tire on the way to work. Those human judgments, that emotion all affects it. So if you're in a regulated industry, where you have to demonstrate that you make the same decisions, you make these decisions consistently in a fair and unbiased way based on facts, moving much more of the decision service, moving much more of how those decisions are made into technology, figuring out how to embed them in technology. And whether that's a deterministic system or some sort of machine learning or AI is another a really good use case for decision automation. So this sort of framework is a really strong canvas where you can take all of the use cases you have for what kind of automation you want. You can figure out, are you trying to move work around your organization, so you need flow? Are you trying to make work that's one team does more efficient, happen faster, so maybe you need some sort of task automation? Or are you trying to simulate human judgments? Do you need some sort of decision automation? And as you might have figured out as I was talking, underneath each of those, there's some technologies which really match up to them. So obviously RPA is a great fit for task automation, but so is integration, some sorts of integration technology, some scripting languages, depending on what part of your organization you work at. There's a lot of ways you can solve a task automation problem, not just RPA. with Flow, you've got ticketing systems, Zendesk, ServiceNow, workflow systems, IBM, BPM, Pega. You've got case management systems. And in the decision side, you've got all of the AI machine learning, you've got all of the rules engines, but even in some cases, I mean, some of the most effective or highest ROI decision automations were put in place. A nested if-then statement in someone's ERP system. All it did was look at expense approvals and apply some rules about which ones needed a human being to look at to sign off and which ones should automatically go through the system and should just be pre-approved. So this allows you to think about how automation technology works, how the use cases that exist for it, and really, though, it also lets us reason a little bit about the way the general RPA brings some order to that general or that more chaotic automation technology marketplace. Historically, and certainly even today probably, the center of gravity for the automation technology marketplace is this middle category of flow. I mean, if RPA is about 2 billion, workflow alone is about 5 billion, and then you've got ticketing systems and ServiceNow and Zendesk and those types of things on top of that, plus other custom-built applications and things. Decisions, again, probably a bit bigger than tasks today, but not the same size as flow. So from a historical center of gravity standpoint, flow is really, in the overall market, really where the center of gravity, where the sort of, when people talk automation technology, that's most of where they're talking about. RPA obviously sits off on the task side of the equation, unsurprisingly. And this structure also lets us reason a little bit and talk a little bit about the characteristics as you move sort of left to right across the page. So the first thing I'd say is that these are broad generalizations. Everyone's mileage will vary, right? If there's ever a slide designed to start a tech flame war in the Slack channel, it's probably this one. The first thing I'd start is maybe the bottom row, right? In our experience, if you find the right use cases and you match the right technology to it, you have an equal chance of achieving a fantastic ROI across any of these technology categories, across any of these types of use cases. But if we reason sort of in broad strokes, if you start over at the task side of the automation category, what you find is that RPA tends to be a smaller initial investment size. It's easier to get, it's a cheaper investment to get started, and it tends to have, and therefore tends to have a quicker payback period. You get your return on your investment faster, and it tends to sort of increase as you go across, right? Again, there's lots of exceptions to all of those rules. I'm talking in broad generalizations, but inside, if you want to put RPA in context, inside why it's getting traction, how it's working, where people are finding places for it in their organization, a lot of it has to do with where it fits in this broad automation. A lot of people want automation, particularly with the pressure the pandemic's putting on their businesses. They feel the need that they have to get some sort of automation in their business. And if you look at this, they want something that has a fast payback period. They don't want it. They want to try to get that payback before they have to announce their annual results. They don't want to have to show to be investing past those annual milestones. So you see, RPA is sort of a good fit for the sign of our times, and it's the natural starting point. If you're coming to automation and a lot of time people who are coming cold to automation and just want to know where to start, it also tends to be the natural starting point. But if that's the current market as we see it today, life moves pretty fast. Technology moves arguably faster. And so there's some big trends which we're seeing in the market today, probably things that if you would have come to this talk 8 months ago, I would say probably both of these things would probably been at the bleeding edge. And now they're things that we're seeing common in the deployed market, in the install base.
Before you go on to the to trends in RPA today, we have a question in the chat. Can RPA work for all web and desktop-based applications?
Well, you never want to say all, right? I mean, there's always exceptions to the rules, but by and large, particularly if you have direct access to the UIs and the user interface, you should be able to get some sort of RPA to work against them. Working through Citrix is possible, but a lot harder. So if you have use cases where you have a shared service center that's all behind Citrix, if we can get the RPA robots, bot runners installed inside the Citrix environment so they can directly access the applications, the likelihood of it working is a lot greater, working easily with low development time. Working through Citrix, is a lot more computer vision and cool AI stuff that Tom talked about yesterday. Is that?
Thank you.
So the first market trend I want to revisit maybe is a lot of what Tom, and I've even used his slides, what he talked about yesterday was some of how AI, he talked about use cases where you could use AI in your business. I want to talk a little bit about how AI is changing that automation market and really the RPA market. So, to revisit this trend, this part, the mailroom sorting, you outsource this, you might buy some hardware, get some actual physical hardware robots like to do mail sorting or something in your mailroom. It's not a really good trend. But at the end of that, what do you have? You have scanned PDFs of some sort. You also get emails at the bottom, extracting invoices from emails at the bottom that give you PDFs. And the result of that is you've got, as Tom said yesterday, this part at the end where you're pulling invoices off emails with a robot, and you've got this part at the end where you have structured data that a robot can easily type into the machine. In many cases, you have human beings doing these steps today, so these are awesome use cases for RPA. They have really quick development times. They're really fast to implement and to get started on. In the middle, you have these two steps, which Tom went into a lot of detail yesterday on, around taking the document, the PDF, finding the line items, extracting the data out of the line items, and then sort of looking up and reasoning about applying logic to that to figure out, actually, now that I have all this data, how do I type it into my invoice system? How do I enter it into the invoice system? And I would have said that the solutions for this, if you look at the broad context of the solution of 3-5 years ago, you would have been buying hardware. You would have had to get bespoke, right? Buy things like data cap, write custom templates for each invoice type. There would have been a lot of bespoke coding and a lot of sort of very specific scanning and technology. This would have been a big investment for your business to do this, to connect these two pieces. And what's interesting about the way the AI is coming into the task management, this part of the market, is you can buy services which do this off Amazon, off Azure. You can buy technologies from the RPA vendors like UiPath and AA, which will do this at a price per page. No upfront investment. You have to train it. There's investment in training it. There's development cost. But actually, the problem has been simplified down. The entry point to get started isn't, I need to buy an enterprise software, I need to buy special hardware to run it, and maybe special hardware to do the scanning. It's coming down to, it's an API call. I hand the API my PDF, and it hands me back structured data. And I pay per page I put through that system. And that is the same as when cloud came into data centers and hardware. It's completely transforming the way the cost point, the entry point, the price points. And what it's really doing, as far as the market trends go, is it's taking a bit of what we used to see as a decision automation, and it's moving it all the way back into the task automation category. It's expanding what the addressable market for task automations are, and it's to include those types of use cases. It might not seem as if reading an invoice, as Tom said yesterday, is something you needed a human being to do, but actually there's a lot of judgment in it until you get the technology and everything else around that. Being able to do that with a pricing model, it's a per-page pricing model. This is just one example of how AI is coming into this whole automation space and changing the edges to all these boxes, changing the way the market is working today. The second trend I'd say is that task automation is getting more inclusive. So what you're looking at today, this is an actual BAX process we used for a consulting model. So BAX is electronic payment. It's from a shared service center, a financial shared service center engagement. The use case was really around use case is really around regional and divisional managers would fill in a form on their intranet requesting a backs payment. It would confirm that they were who they said they were with their logins, and then that would get picked up in the shared service center in these front green boxes at the beginning of it. Someone in the shared service center would pick up the request, read it, do a bunch of research, check to make sure all the compliance checks were there, the bank checks were there, make sure that some regional manager wasn't just paying for his boiler to be fixed, right? That this was an actual supplier for the company, that it matched an actual invoice. And then at the end, and then there's a bit in the middle where there's all of these yellow up and down lines in the flow chart, and that's basically after all the data has been gathered for the compliance check. It off. So there's a 4I rule. Not one person can't approve it. You have to go to a second person as well to check it. If there's certain characteristics or certain suppliers, then we have to check with other people as well. So there's this middle yellow box bit, and at the end there's a second green box where it's passed all the compliance checks. Now we go into some systems, we rekey some data, and we move the money, and we push send, and we're done. And really, in this process flow, again, the beginning and the end of this process are absolutely fantastic use cases for RPA. You get data. In this case, we were getting data electronically. It was in a structured format. It was data that Roomba could very easily pick up. It could identify the customer number. It could look up, go into all these different systems, pull these records out, gather together into an elegant file that was easy to perform compliance checks against. And then there was this middle step, and that's why it's in green. In the end, it was easy to do the payment. This middle step, which was yellow, because our advice to the customer was this middle bit you're going to need a flow engine for of some sort. We need to hand this work off. Their particular compliance and audit function required that a human being, that actually two human beings, reviewed and signed off each of these tests. So this wasn't something we could automate. Obviously, using some sort of decision automation to skip this step would have been an option. It wasn't in this case. So it was a yellow. We're not sure if this is worth automating. It's an amber on your red, amber, green. Is it a good use case? But if we look at today, the major RPA vendors all have human-in-the-loop technology. They all have inboxes and forms which you can embed in the system that will allow you to send that approval off to a being and have the human work together with the robot, right? So the robot does a bit of work, gathers everything together, hands it to a human. The human can hand it to another human, and they can push the approval button. And when the approval buttons are met, they can hand it back to a robot who will complete the work or finish off the task. This type of work isn't capable of handling an entire value stream. It's not a replacement for owning a ticketing system in your shared service center. It's not a replacement for a workflow or a case management system. What it is really useful for is instances like this, where you have a single worker who, where there's some human judgment, some human handoffs in the middle of it, and you need to take that task and hand it off. So it expands that task automation to not just be what one person can do in one sitting, but maybe what one person can do in one sitting, and include him asking the guy next to him to help him with the job to finish it. But that's still a pretty big expansion. And if you reason about the market, the same with AI, those types of technology advances where we see task vendors now, the RPA vendors now, including some process orchestration, some ability to forms for the humans and the robots to interact and talk to each other in more elegant and sophisticated manners. What that's really doing is taking some of the use cases where you might have had to hand off and get to a flow use case and hand it back to the task box. Again, sort of expanding what's possible to solve in the RPA or the task market. These are both really early developments as far as market adoption and how broadly we see them in the market. So, by no means is this the most common, are these last two use cases, I would say, common in the RPA market today. But they're use cases which increasingly we see being adopted, being implemented, right? They went from being, 90% of the people wouldn't ever dream of using RPA for any of those use cases to now probably about half of our customers are looking at or trying or having a go at these kinds of use cases. And so both of those two trends that I've just talked about, both using taking data out of unstructured structured documents and as part of a flow, and putting humans in the loop to work together with robot. After the customer panel, we'll come back. One of my colleagues, Dan Seeger, will actually show you some of that in action so you can get a sense of the art of the possible around it. And I think the last trend that's worth talking about is how RPA, where RPA gets fits in the system. I mean, there's some things I've already mentioned. We see RPA working at in new verticals that never adopted workflow engines or decision engines in any with widely in their industry. We also see smaller businesses adopting RPA. The cost point, the entry point is lower, so that allows it it makes it more accessible to a much broader community. We certainly, I mean, this is interesting. It comes from a really prominent information studies academic conference in Europe, RISI. The guy on the side there, Haji Reigers, is actually on Twitter as Prof BPM. He is one of the founding fathers of process mining. So he wrote some of the algorithms that people use if you are a process mining aficionado. And yeah, his claim here with how RPA is changing the world is the power of RPA is allows people to automate their own work. And I would say this kind of using RPA as low code, we certainly see that in small implementations. At scale, we see it with in limited governed frameworks. If you want to use RPA at a large scale, you still need a software development mentality towards it today. You still need to write the governance controls around it. You still need to do all of those elements. Where I think he's probably a little bit of a hyperbole, the way the academic community is embracing RPA and viewing it as like this democratization of the future of work. But what is true, I think, inside this is that because RPA is accessing and accessing the systems, doing the work exactly the way the users do in the shared service center, it means those users in the shared service center can sit with the developer and really understand and work together to collaborate on, this is how we should solve this use case. The number of times that we go into a customer and the person who solves, we have RPA, we're struggling to screen scrape a screen or interact with during one workflow, the happy path of the RPA automation. But the person who solves the problem for us is not normally the SAP developer or the ERP developer who's working on the system. The person who solves it for us is the guy in the shared service center who does this job every day. Because he's the guy who says, well, actually, there's another screen which does the same thing. Should we see if we can automate on that screen instead of this screen? They're the people, the business users are the people who know how the user interface works, where the different elements are, where the different places he can go to find this information, and how the systems work. It's those business SMEs who are increasingly involved in and empowered by this type of automation. And that is changing because that means that people are bringing business budgets to buy RPA solutions, not just IT budgets. And a lot of times, of all the automation tech, RPA is the one that is most commonly bought with business budget. To be successful, you still want to have IT at the table, for sure. But it's an interesting trend that it's starting to lean more towards that business enablement, business empowerment place. Much more so than a lot of the other technologies we've seen, we work in and you see across the automation space. So that's sort of three trends we see, where the market kind of is, both the narrow RPA market. Certainly, I mean, 5 years ago, we would have called RPA a niche technology in automation. And now I think, we need to start thinking about it as being a common component for enterprise architectures or organizations. But RPA is only a part of that broader spectrum. So I've tried today to maybe show you where the current state of that spectrum is, how to think about that full automation market, and also to think about how the technology changes in AI, in flow technology and RPA technology are really putting pressure on changing the way the lines are blurred or lines are drawn. I hope you found that helpful. And before we go, I see Krista's already put the poll up. I think we'll just segue now to the customer panel, Krista.
Thanks, Brack. you all can see the poll in progress right now. So
Krista, you're on mute.
been talking for a second, just like that. It's one of those 2020 things that Scott pointed out. So we're going to see the poll coming in. And the poll is, are you seeing any of these RPA trends in your business? Well, today we have representation from 4 different businesses, 4 different customers, and we're going to start by letting them introduce themselves. So Chris, you're top of my screen.
First,
Why don't you go ahead?
Chris McCarley. I work for TTI. We're a large distributor of electronic components, a part of the Berkshire Hathaway family. I'm a development application manager there. I do focus on apps for our sales teams. But then a couple of years ago, I was named or drafted to lead our RPA initiative.
Thanks, Chris. Morale, we'll go kind of Brady Bunch style here.
Yeah, I'm Murali Perumalraj. I'm working for Silicon Labs. Silicon Labs is one of the leading silicon software solutions for smart and connected world. I'm leading the RPA core team here in Silicon Labs.
Thanks, Morale. And then Scott Lancaster, you're on mute right now, but.
My name is Scott Lancaster. I'm VP of IT Shared Services for Kinco Logistics. Kinco is the largest women-owned logistics service provider in the United States, with about 90 distribution facilities throughout the U.S.
All right. And then Roger, last but not least. Oh, Roger, I think we're having some sound issues for you. Do you want to try dialing back in? Sorry about that. Well, while Roger is working on dialing back in, we'll go ahead and end this poll and share the results. It looks like almost everybody is seeing these trends, Brack, so it looks like you're spot on. In the 59 people that voted, we have 51% that are seeing AI changing the art of the possible, that 43 or 73% are saying that task automation is getting more inclusive, and that 36% are saying they're seeing the democratization of automation there. So while we wait on Roger to come back online, Scott, we'll start with you. So what drove you and Kinco Group to really think about RPA?
And in 2019, 2020, like a lot of companies around the U.S., around the world, actually, we started on our digital transformation strategic projects. And RPA was actually part of that initiative. As David was saying, we knew there was a better way to do repetitive tasks rather than just having people pound them out every day. And we wanted to free those people up to actually do tasks that furthered the business and added value to the business more. We had some previous experience with other tools several years ago, but never really pursued it. But as we have hired more people over the past several years that had some scripting with the Pythons of the world, we realized that it had really matured, the technology had matured quite a bit over the past few years. We chose Automation Anywhere, and it really has moved from more marketing to actual, it works now, and that's where we're at, and that's what drove us to that point.
Roger, you able to get any sound? Can we hear you? Don't think we can't hear you yet. Let me see if we can fix that. Just to go on, so Morali, what did RPA solve for you? What were you guys looking at RPA for over at Silicon Labs?
Yeah, one of our initial journey on RPA started with the request came from BU. It's to automate a purchase order that we receive on an email as an attachment, PDF attachment, and convert it into a sales order. That's the initial one we started looking at. And we cannot do that one with our existing B2B processing. The customer always sends us as a PDF. So we took that PDF and looked into technology, and we found the RPA is useful, so they can do a OCR on the PDF and scrap the data that we require and convert it into a SAP sales order transaction. So that's one of the use cases that we started with, and it solved like human reading the PDF and trying to type into our SAP transactional system and converting it into the sales orders. And the other use case that we found is like the same, related to the same thing. It's basically getting a PDF attachment on AP invoices that vendor sends us, and then we transact that into our SAP system. It involves a lot of human effort there. They try to make sure that all the data they cut and paste from the PDF into that transactional system is correct. If they do like one more zero to a sales order, it changes the number altogether. So it resolves all those issues with that RPA.
Chris, I know you guys at TTI are doing something a little bit similar to what they're doing over at Silicon Labs. Can you explain that?
So we, we have a number of applications in different verticals: finance, sales, and supply chain, or what we call product. And I mean, we've seen benefits in recovering lost revenue. We've saved papers and trees. A lot of reports were generated. We're saving. But our biggest benefit, like I think most cases, is saving the person time. So we're able to do things, like have been discussed, to make people take stuff off their plate, make them more agile. And I think that's kind of a final benefit too, that's less tangible, but having a certain business agility. So we can not only look at addressing older applications that we have and streamlining them, but we have another tool with RPA to be able to meet new things that come in due to changing business needs. For example, when China tariff landed, that was kind of a scramble for the business, but RPA allowed us to respond and streamline some of that administration for something that we'd never seen before. Great question.
Nice. So just to ask you a different question on that one, when the China tariffs hit relatively quickly, how quickly were you guys able to adjust? And was that part of having done RPA?
It was. So we were relatively new. This was last year, I guess. It's all a blur. But the business had to scramble. So we were able to, within a few days, spin up a bot to really streamline and save some administration around that, because now we had to alert all of our buyers of these tariffs. And it saved roughly a full week of work for someone, every time.
So we'll go back. Morale, what type of business problems have you guys found that are working well with RPA? And before you answer that, if you're in the audience and you have questions for our panelists, please just throw them in the Q&A and we will get to them as we can. So, Raleigh.
Yeah, so as a growing company, we face a lot of challenges automating SAP web applications, stuff like that. Any new request that comes directly into IT department for doing any system-related changes. With the RPA, we found that it's a tool that the person with a less programming skills can start developing an RPA on whatever the application they want to automate it. And we follow the federated COE model, and we trained our business team on the automation, and they can start automating the process they want to automate. So that's one big advantage of using the RPA here in the system. So it's not like you need to have a really good programming skill. You can have a minimal programming skills, and then they can do it. If you know the macro Excel, then they can do really well with the Excel automation in the tool that we have it.
So how did you guys go about at Silicon Labs finding the right thing to automate? Is there a process that you faced, or a board that you had to present to, or?
Yeah, so as a part of our COE, we have a monthly meeting. So we try to present all the process that they want to automate it, and then we go through and see if we look into the process that's not requiring a human decisions to be taken, the process of automation. And the other thing, it's a repetitive, and also it's going to be a time saving for the user. Let's say if they do a process for a minute or two on a day, we are not going to automate that. If it's a process that's going to take a minute or two, but they do 100 times a day, then that's the right process to automate it. So we consider those kind of process to be automated. That's our COE edition that we take it at that point.
Thank you. And so Chris, we'll go back to you. What are some of the lessons learned on your RPA journey? I know you guys, I think out of this group, have been on it the longest.
That's almost scary. Yeah, we've been doing it for a couple of years now. We learned a number of lessons, including really getting into security early on. That has been a huge aspect of our bots. A lot of things, though, are put under the lesson of care and feeding. We call care and feeding of our bots. So we spend a lot of time making sure that they keep running smoothly. There are a lot of things in our IT environment that are changing all the time. So every week there's some kind of patching, upgrades, things happening, any of which could cause our bots to get hung up or go down. So we are very proactive about keeping them running smoothly. That's part of what BP3 was really truly good about helping us with. So early on, they gave us some best practices and some Boilermaker code to let us be able to track, log, and manage our bots. And since then, we've done a couple things in our own, which is adding some bots to actually help with the bots. So we have, for example, a bot that will change passwords in a secure way so they don't age out on us and we get a surprise like on a Sunday night or something. We also, if you saw my presentation last year, we created something called the Roomba Bot after the Roomba robot. And that goes and cleans up. We make extensive logging and also like report file generation on network shares. So it goes around and cleans up after the other bots. And we're always looking for other ways like that we can kind of automate the automation and help us keep things running. I'd say one last benefit I'm seeing too, which is kind of new, is I'm seeing a certain momentum that we're getting. So I kind of wondered if the case would start to taper off, but I feel like the team is getting better at this stuff. And I think it's opening up possibilities for new bot cases in the enterprise. So I think we're just scratching the surface. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do with it.
Nice. So Roger, I think I have added your phone number successfully. So let's see if you can unmute. No, maybe? All right. Well, sorry, Roger. I really thought we had that this morning. So, with
Can you write in some paper?
Yeah. Okay. We were having some problems with Roger, so I'm sorry about the sound. But so I guess we'll move on. Scott, you guys, I guess you started most recently here out of this group. What would you tell others that were just getting started with RPA and down this journey of automating tasks and task automation in general?
So first of all, I would say get a good partner like a BP3, and that's not a plug just for BP3, but the group we had, Ted, Arani, and Shravan saying, hey, we did an incredible job for us. So I would say that actually teach your team and not just do it for you. I've been burned by that before, and you really need someone that will teach you how to fish, as the old saying goes, rather than just fish for you. Also, allocate time for people to learn. And do it right the first time. Shravan and Ted really pushed the team to learn and to do it, not just not listen to what they're saying. They wanted to make sure they understood it. So that's a critical piece. And honestly, we've got 4. We started in July. We've got 4 in production right now, and 3 will be in production in the next 3 weeks. So we've made great progress with that methodology. I would pick some easy, quick wins, and we did that to get some people excited about it. And 2 other things would be to look at the process. If the process is a broken process, all RPA is going to do is make it break faster at larger scale. So make sure you're not automating a bad process, because that really does. An automated bad process is not a good thing. And the thing we're working through now is prioritizing and making sure that the money they're saving is real dollars, not just PowerPoint dollars, so that when you go back and measure your success, you can look at budgets and actually adhere to and say, yes, we actually did save that money.
Thanks. So we'll take a couple questions from the Q&A right now. So the first question is actually from Morali. Any pro cons you've seen using a federated model, and how did you overcome the cons?
Yeah, so the pros are like you don't want the IT to be a bottleneck, so they can develop on their own. The business team, we expect them to develop their bot on their own. The cons, I can see a lot of cons initially, because this is the first part they're developing. They don't have enough programming knowledge. They have minimal programming knowledge. The code they're writing, it's not going to be the standard what you're looking for. The first few bots, what I faced is we used to sit with them and then we asked them to code it. And we used to, it's like a mentor sitting next to them and then telling them this is the right way to do it and asking them how you handle it on day-to-day basis. Automation is one of the things I tell them. So do whatever you're doing on your system when you're transacting this particular process, try to replicate the same thing in the RPA. So we will ask them to think through it and then they can code it. So that's the one thing the teaching them will be the con. I can say you have to babysit them through the first few bots, like the first or second bot, then they will know it. Once they understand the concept, then they're picking it up. I have seen with few of our business users where they started the first bot, they had hundreds of questions. The second bot onwards, it reduced, and now they are developing like 3 or 4 bots at the same time. There's no questions at all from them, and I can see the way the bot is working is perfectly good.
Nice. So this next question, I did not come from an RPA vendor, but I know we have a lot of RPA vendors on the line here today, so it's going to be a good one. If you could add one capability to your RPA platform, what would you do? What would that would add or open new opportunities? What would you add? Scott, why don't you take this one first?
We're very new to the journey. I was hoping you wouldn't pick me, but okay. So, some of the more the promotions and the check-in, check-out type things of managing code would be. I have an IT background, and there's some of that, but just enhancing that to make sure that you can do traverse where things need to change if something breaks.
Yeah. Chris?
For us, I think would be capability or better capability to handle on-demand bot requests. We have a lot of cases where a person wants to send an email and have a bot get executed sort of on demand. And we've spun our own thing to augment. We're using Automation Anywhere. We've spun up our own thing to kind of augment that, but it would be nice to have that more as part of the standard tool.
Riley?
Yeah, I would say one of the points that Chris has touched already, it is like whenever there's a patch update that goes on, sometimes we don't have a network connectivity and stuff like that. So the bot may fail and bot runners will be stopped totally unless somebody's monitoring. So we want to have like a monitoring bot kind of thing on top of the bot that's running to make sure it's running properly.
Yeah. So we have a question in the chat, Scott, that relates to what you were talking about. How are you planning on RPA checkouts for system upgrades related to RPA? And I think Brac might have some best practices on this for later today, but does anybody have a good answer for that?
We don't right now. We're still evolving in that. Like I said, we have 4 in production, and I know that Shravan and Ted helped us kind of set some framework up for that. But a formal process is, to what Chris was saying earlier about system upgrades and what can be affected. We're leveraging our current change management processes, but that could be expanded quite a bit.
I feel like
Russ, sorry.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, we and BP3 helped us set this up, and this is common in our other non-RPA environments, is having a dev queue and production environments. And so we're able to move it through a deployment workflow, similar to other DevOps things.
Yeah, we did a similar one with our SAP upgrade. Recently, we did our SAP to the next version of upgrade. That's a major application change on our end. So we had to run through all the bots that has an impact on the SAP system or like the transact on the SAP system, extensive testing. We have like 3 different environment, development, QA, and production. So we try to make sure all the RPAs are working perfectly okay with the new upgrade version of it.
I have a feeling that that question is going to blow up our Slack channel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's one of the things, as Krista said, we do. I mean, those are great answers, and you guys have sort of navigated the hard part maybe, but it's a good example of where the citizen developer business is at the end of their, they need someone with an IT system governance mindset to help them manage the code. And if you just let the business guys write the bots, they're going to fall into that pit every time. They're going to fall into that trap every time. And one of the things we've seen a lot with people from an IT background who are new into RPA is if we told them it was an API and the API was going from version 1 to version 1.1, they would all pull the API. They would all look at the release schedule for the new API. They would look at what the changes were. They would evaluate whether there was affected on any systems, and they would test it all. And if you say that Salesforce is going to have an update over the weekend and the UI is going to change, or you're going to do, as Morales said, an SAP upgrade, you now need to treat if you have a larger state of robots, you need to treat your UIs, the user interfaces, as if they're an API with almost the same mentality. And if you do that, then you can use the tools and the change management you have to help navigate that in that experience.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. What security concerns are you guys aware of, or do people need to be aware of when it comes to bots submitting thousands of forms on secure sites? Are any of you working with secure sites or submitting forms on secure sites right now?
We are.
We're
using
Go ahead.
Some of our banking applications, and we're very, very cognizant of that and watch who has access to those bots. And again, follow our dev prod UA processes for change management to ensure that we're not nobody's getting hold of those IDs, and that we're following proper security to maintain those application IDs. Sorry, Chris.
No problem. So yeah, I mentioned before security, and I would say in our environment, because we have fairly comprehensive processes in place, it was harder to get bots to be able to do things than it was to keep them from doing things. So we do have bots going out to external sites doing forms. We have bots accessing sensitive areas of our business systems, and those are all controlled, though, in secure ways. We had conversations with our security people, made sure we were doing what was good and made sense. In a way, we were doing things that aren't that much different from what applications are, because they're all accessing data. But when you start throwing the term, bots out there, or people start thinking AI, that starts to raise a lot of questions that are not exactly legitimate, but they're things that you need to deal with. Great question.
All right, we got one more question in the Q&A, which was, has anyone on the panel had to deal with performance issues for systems downstream after implementing bots?
I can
so the
take
bots
over
are
on
moving
this.
too fast?
Yeah, so one thing what we found is we have a development system that's an on-prem system, and all our bot runners are on AWS. So when we deploy a bot from on-prem to AWS, we found some issues, like a challenge with the AWS cloud solution connecting to our application. There will be a delay in the accessing the screens and stuff like that. When you're developing, you can see it's like seamless. You can see the screens will be appearing really fast and stuff like that. So that's why we always tell the user after you complete developing, make sure that you upload it to AWS control room and run it in the bot runner system to make sure it goes through the application or transaction, whatever they're trying to automate, it works fine. Because we seeing a lag there. So it was expecting a screen to be there. They want to perform some task on the screen, but that it takes few seconds before it can appear when you're accessing from the AWS compared to when you're doing an on-prem development. So those are the issues that we found it, and we do the testing. That's the reason we test on the actual bot runner system to make sure it works fine.
Well, before you guys go, I'm going to ask you guys each one more question, which we had to address the pandemic at some point during today. Have you guys found that using RPA has benefited you during the pandemic? And have you found expanded use for RPA in the pandemic? Chris, why don't you start?
Okay. To some degree, I think it's a part of the overall sense that our our business community is embracing RPA. They had their misgivings, and we've had cases where they've been, not always, the bots don't always go smoothly, but I think we've seen them adopt it better. And I think that we have seen some cases recently that they feel like can help them be more productive. They're doing fairly well, but working from home, it's a productivity situation we're all dealing with. And I think RPA has given them some opportunities to help streamline things so their users, our sales users, can be more productive.
Riley, what about you guys here in Austin?
Yeah, so one thing I found with the pandemic is we have a lot of business users since we follow the federated model. So we have the business develop a bot. So they didn't, when we initially started, they say they can spend only 10% of their time on developing the bot because they have a day-to-day activity that they have to carry out, and they spend only 10% of the time. With the pandemic, I've seen the change because they are stuck at home more than 14 hours on the system. They had enough time to develop bot. I can see a lot of bots has been developed during the pandemic period, and then they're trying to automate the process. And now once they got hang of it, they're saying, okay, I can automate this one. I'm getting a lot more bots. They want to automate it. It's coming in queue. I see that growth of the bot deployment rate is gone up during the pandemic.
So you're getting more bot developers throughout, working from home bot developers.
That's right. That's right.
Scott, what about you guys?
We're new on our journey, so we haven't seen a huge change in that. I will absolutely agree that my developers have their productivity skyrocketed as they're doing this at home. But but we can see where that would help in the future as we start growing our bot catalog, if you will.
Well, thank you all for joining us. And if you have any more questions for our panelists, feel free to put them through, and we'll try and answer them throughout the day. But thank you guys for joining us and for being here and being advocates for RPA.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right. So, Brack, as I promote Dan Seeger into being a panelist, we have a couple questions that came into the chat for you. So the first question is, we've seen, and you're on mute, we've seen frequent issues with working with third-party websites and attempting proper testing of automation, as some of these sites don't give test environments. Any advice on testing automations of these types on live sites, but testing environments in internal software? Our change control process tends to create a lot of emergency change due to the site changes.
Yeah, I mean, there's no silver bullet for this question. I mean, you have to think about what kind of data you're passing across, being able to write the bots in a safe way. You need to try to test them to some extent and safely. I mean, it is, certainly the first thing I say is, if you're talking about third-party websites, really think about whether or not, what kinds of, particularly if they're public-facing websites, what your bot is doing, what it's going to run across, and do you need, and is it a good candidate for automation? Because they can change their website and at any time without telling you. It might be a great candidate for automation. It might also be very fragile. So you're always going to achieve these. Unfortunately, I don't have a silver bullet. I mean, you just need to break the code down. I mean, we can help you with that. Try to design a safe way of sort of taking the code apart and how to test the various pieces that, so we test reading all the elements on write a bot that sort of tests everything, being able to read the site without submitting all the data, for example, right? And break it apart. But it's not. But again, third-party websites are automating on other people's systems, particularly at volume, is always kind of tricky, particularly if you aren't in a dialogue with them to sort of ask for what you need to get test data from them. That's a very difficult, and it's maybe not, for these kinds of reasons, not the best use case without actually thinking through all of the implications of it. So, I mean, depending on how fast your bots are submitting and how much data, I mean, they could block your IP address because they think you could be a malicious agent working on their website. So
we have seen that before. Then we have a question here around trends. I think we all understand and see business cases for automation via RPA and AI or ML. My question is, where does it grow into? Once RPA is fully embraced within the organization, manual processes are automated, i.e. the invoice example. What's next? Are there other areas to grow and get lean?
Well, I mean, I don't know that that's a question that we know the answer to yet, right? I don't think RPA is mature enough that we know what its future state's going to be. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the session, some of the possible permutations. But certainly, like one of the things that came up in one of the other questions was, do you have a problem when you automate one step of the process and then the next step, bottlenecks or downstream systems are then struggling? I mean, that's classic from a lean sense. That's classically, it's a local sub-optimization, right? You should always look, the lean guys, Six Sigma guys will tell you, you should always look at the whole value chain. And improving only one step the way RPA does will only make the next step bottleneck. And certainly, though, to be successful at RPA, where you start to evolve to is you need that complete lean value chain thinking. You need that complete systems thinking view of your organization to start to be successful. You know, in the beginning, you can easily get quick wins. There are things which are really causing you a lot of pain. You have 30 people pushing paper in a basement, and you can automate 70% of their job and free them up to do better things with their time. But as you move on, you're going to increasingly find that automating one step is going to bottleneck or have other effects on other parts of your organization. And learning as a business how to think about that whole landscape and that whole value chain is going to add real value. But that's not new skills. That's like using old skills in a new context, right? And I'll talk a little bit about that in the end section.
All right. Well, the last question before we let Dan take over, I'm going to actually direct to Dan to take some pressure off of you, Brack. So Dan, when we change bot system layout, screen size, do we have to revisit the code, or does the bot read that automatically?
Oh, nice, easy question to start with.
I thought you'd enjoy that one.
Yeah, I'm going to say this is going to be a bit of a developer answer, but it's going to depend, right? So there are multiple ways in which the bot can recognize the data on a screen. So, for instance, if you're inputting or reading data from a website, then it's going to introspect the HTML that sits behind that website. So as long as that doesn't change, then no matter where the position or the screen size of the position of the elements on the screen or the screen size, it won't make any difference. However, if there are other ways of taking data or pushing data onto the screens. You might be really restricted in the way that you do this, and you're using positional values. Always a bad idea. But if you're doing that, as soon as the screen size changes or the resolution changes, you're in a world of pain. You're going to have to revisit those kind of things. So if you develop your bots in a way that you're using best practices, etc., then no, you're not going to have to kind of revisit them. But if you're a bit constricted by kind of the target systems, etc., then there could be a possibility of having to do that. But obviously, we always use the best ways of doing it. Right?
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to take this moment to remind everyone to continue the conversation on our Slack organization. I put the Slack organization over, or the link to the Slack organization over in the chat. With that, I'll hand it back over to Brack to introduce our next section.
I'm just going to hand right off to Dan, really. You'll now be joined by Dan Seeger. He's he's the RPA practice lead and one of the senior consultants who supports us here in Europe and works with our customers in the European team. And I've sort of asked him to sort of walk you guys through what these two trends I was talking about, how AI is coming into the RPA and task use cases, and how we're finding more and more that the technology is better at handing off work between a human and a robot and back again. So how does that look? What is the art of the possible now? What's the state of the art about that? And I guess without further ado, Dan, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Brack. I'm just going to share my screen and start off with a few slides, and then we'll kind of get into a bit of a demo.
Dan is doing the live demo on at Driven virtually, so he's the bravest of all of us, really.
Yeah, he's the one that's most nervous about it. No, it'll all be good. Okay, as Brack said, my name is Dan Seeger. I'm essentially an automation consultant here in the UK at BP3. I'm going to take you through kind of a use case, and if you've seen RPA before, it's going to be a use case that you kind of recognise because it's a big problem for a lot of people. But hopefully we'll take a kind of a different perspective on the way that we're trying to tackle it with automation. Before I get into that, and before I jump into the demo, I just want to touch on a couple of concepts. So you'll hear in the RPA space and the automation space, two different types of automation: unattended automation and attended automation. And we're going to touch on both of those in the demo. So unattended automation generally runs in the background. It's probably running on a VM in your data center somewhere. And it's really best placed for high volume transactional processes that require no human intervention. Whereas attended automations kind of work hand in hand with your user. The robot is responsible for the things that it does well, so well-defined repetitive parts of the task. And then the user can be responsible for making judgment calls, and we can hand off between the user and the robot at a number of different points inside of those automations. So following on from that, what I'd like to do is sort of give you a demo of where we use both of these kind of types of automation to solve elements of the invoice matching process as a whole. So the unattended automation to process the high volume invoices, applying the rules to check that they match the purchase orders. And then we'll use attended automation to assist the user in correcting any exceptions that may occur during that matching process. Because it's not going to be we're not going to match invoices to purchase orders 100% of the time. Otherwise, we wouldn't bother doing it, right? So there are going to be exceptions, and we need to have an element of human intervention and human judgment in that process. Okay, so what's involved in the invoice matching process? In its simplest form, what we're doing is checking the data that on the invoice is what we've expected. Now, this means that we need to validate the data against the corresponding purchase order that's going to be held in our ERP system. For a human being, matching the process or the matching process is pretty trivial, but it's a time-consuming one. So they'll do things like check the purchase order number, the lines, the totals, and that's really the easy part. But opening the documents, navigating the systems, dealing with the exceptions is where we're kind of losing time, and we can be best placed kind of doing other parts of the process that are best suited to what people do best, right? For the robot, on the other hand, doing the checking and the navigation is the easy part of the process for it. But being able to kind of interpret what an invoice actually is, extract the data and deal with the exceptions is a far tougher prospect for a robot to kind of to handle. Really. Okay, so if we think like a couple of years ago, automating that end-to-end invoice matching process would have taken a number of different technologies. So things like OCR, complex rules and scripting to extract the data. And then we'd probably end up with a custom application or ticketing system to bring a human into the loop. And then we'd use kind of conventional RPA to perform the navigation and the matching type tasks. The kind of screen scraping, all that navigation stuff. But with kind of advancements in intelligent document processing and the introduction of forms builders into RPA vendors' products, we now have the ability to use a single platform to automate that entire end-to-end process. So in the demo, we're going to look at how we can use intelligent document processing to extract sort of semi-structured data from our invoices, and then how unattended and attended automation can be used to automate our invoice matching process. Okay, so let's just dive out of here and we'll go into a bit of a demo, and I'll kind of hopefully give you an example of how all this fits together, really. So before I kind of get into what the automated process is going to do, I just want to kind of talk about or talk through what the manual process actually looks like. So if you think, you've got your maybe accounts administrator that's monitoring an inbox of invoices that are coming in. You know, as those invoices come in, they want to match them up with the purchase orders in the ERP system. So you know, they're generally going to launch each of the invoices, have a look at the data, and then launch their ERP system or navigate the ERP system if it's running already. So here we go. We've launched our ERP system. We've got our invoice over here. I'm then going to kind of do a bit of navigation. So we're going to need to find our purchase order inside of the ERP. So I need my purchase order number 56443. There it is. Open up the purchase order, and then, like I said, this is the kind of easy bit for a person to do. You know, check the purchase order numbers right. Check my line items just at a glance, and the values are right. And then check the balance, but in this case, you know, there's no sales tax applied to it. So it might be that we need to kind of review this in more detail. You know, then I'd, you know, close this one, go on to my next next invoice, and kind of repeat the process really. So, as I said before, not a particularly difficult process, but a time-consuming process and pretty boring and laborious one at that. Okay, so. One of the problems that we've got though is when we come to automate this, you know, me reading from the invoice is an easy way of extracting data, right? I'm good at that. I can read, so great. That's a good start. And I know it's an invoice because I can see it's got an invoice written on it. But for a robot or for automation, that's quite a tough prospect. But fortunately for us, what we can do is use intelligent document processing. So here, if I just expand this. So what I've done for this particular demo is that I've created what's called a learning instance. And what a learning instance allows me to do is interrogate an example of a document and teach the machine learning algorithm what different elements on that document actually represent, so that it can then extract that data for me. So I've got all sorts of different document types inside of here, but the invoice matching extraction one is the one I'm interested in, and I can just have a quick look at some of the sort of statistics around that. I've processed 121 documents, 98% straight through processing, 100% accuracy. Great. So let's just have a quick delve into what actually goes into setting up a learning instance. So when I created this, I kind of gave it an example of the document that I'm going to process, so an invoice. And what I did was I selected the kind of document type of it being invoice, and it kind of said to me, well, I know that an invoice has got an invoice number, a date, a total, etc., and line items. And from that, it's then kind of made a best guess at what it thinks are those particular elements. And when I first did this, it was pretty spot on, to be honest with you. So if we just click through this, you can see that the invoice number is going to extract the invoice total down at the bottom of the document and some of the line items. What it will do for me is if for instance, it processes a document that it can't validate 100%, it will put that into a queue for a user to go into that and do some validation. And as they fix any errors with it, they put it back through the machine learning algorithm, so that over time it's going to become more confident in what it's doing, and you're going to get better straight-through processing statistics. Okay, so let's just save that. So this will enable me now to be able to take invoices that are coming into my queue, send them to the intelligent document processing, and that will then return to me data in a format that I can then ingest using the robot, essentially. Okay, so let's just get that over there. Now, what I'm going to do here is we're going to have a robot running in the background, and it's going to be monitoring my email inbox. So before I do anything, I'm just going to send a new email of invoices into this particular process. So because I'm running Zoom, it might take a second or two to just fire into here. But we should see a new invoice or a new email hit my inbox any second. Could do with some music to play while she's doing this. Here we go. So once that invoice hits my inbox, and there it is, the robot's going to take over and start to process those invoices that are attached to that email. What I've done is I've added a number of points in the process where it's just going to kind of wait so that we can look at what's happening sort of step by step. So the first thing it's done is it's tried to access my inbox. I'm going directly to Outlook for this particular process, just for illustration purposes really, but this would be, you wouldn't see that in the background in a real life situation. So the robot's now kind of giving me a message. It's the new invoices have been received and attachments downloaded. So let's just open this up. So it's downloaded these into a folder on the C drive. Okay, so if we look at this, 2 invoices attached, and here they are. So let's let that go a little bit longer. So next what it's going to do is start to take those invoices and push them up to this learning instance so it can extract the data. So while it does that, if we just jump into this folder, and you can see that we've got this little spinning wheel now that is doing some processing. And as it does this, you'll see the documents as they're processed appear in this folder. Here we go. So my 2 invoices, and as it processes each of those particular invoices, we're going to get a CSV file produced as output. Okay, so that's done. So invoice data has been extracted, my 2 invoices, and here is my output. So let's just have a quick look at this. So this is now in a form that's kind of more easily processed by the robot, essentially. So there's one of our invoices which has got 1 line. Let's just have a quick look at the second one. Again, so this particular invoice has got 4 invoice lines, so you can see the line items, the unit values, or the unit prices, the quantities and totals, essentially. Okay, so now that we've kind of extracted that data, we can now hand it off to a kind of conventional RPA automation that's going to take that data and actually do the invoice matching process. So let's let that go. So you see it's now fired up the ERP system as I did before manually. It's going to do a bit of navigation to find out to go to the right place. Finds the invoice, the purchase order, and now it's doing checking those particular attributes against the invoice and purchase order. Here's the second one. Awesome. All good. We're done. So a lot quicker than I could have done it. However, now that it's processed those invoices, we need to kind of check to see what has been matched and what exceptions we've got. So if we look in the match, so there's a few in here that I did earlier, so you can see the kind of dates and times on these. I did these earlier today. So one of those invoices that we processed was matched successfully, which is great. However, if we go into our exceptions, so we've got one of the invoices that we tried to process has failed to be matched. So there's a problem between the invoice and the purchase order. Helpfully, it's given us or create a file for us that's got the reason why it can be matched for each of these invoices. So the line total does not match the purchase order. And here's another one. Now, without any kind of automation, I'd have to drop back to my kind of business as usual process. I'd have to navigate to my ERP system, do the matching process manually. And, you know, that's going to be a real pain for me, right? However, we can make use of attended automation to give us a bit of a digital assistant. So if I just launch that, give me 1 second. And what the digital assistant will do is make use of some of the automations that we've already created. You know, we've got automations to do things like navigate the purchase order and or navigate the ERP system to find the purchase order. We've also got the rules that we've built into our automation to do the invoice matching. So rather than me have to do that manually, why don't we kind of bake that into a digital assistant so that we can do that automatically. So my machine's on a bit of a go slow, but give me a second. Right. So I'm just going to get rid of these for a second. So my digital assistant is just about to kind of launch for me. Here we go. So what we've done here is, as I said before, so some of the vendors have actually kind of baked into the product the ability to create forms to allow you to kind of surface data to your users so that we can interact with our automations. So in this case, what I've done is I've created this digital assistant that allows us to surface up all of the relevant data about the exceptions that have occurred during the invoice matching process. So if I select this first invoice, it's going to load up the invoice for me so that I can see what's going on in there, and it's loaded up the actual exceptions as they appear. Let's just go for this one, it's a bit more interesting. So now, rather than me have to kind of fire up the ERP system and fix any problems, what I can do is hit my Find Purchase Order button, and that makes use of some of the automations that we've already created to do that navigation for me and find the purchase order. So this is kind of hands off, look, not doing anything, navigating to the right purchase order, and now it's handed control back to me so that I can actually do what I do best and solve the problem. So we can see that there's a problem with the invoice line. So let's just have a quick look at our invoice. So I can see that this particular line should be $2.99. So clearly somebody's forgotten to put the price in. So we can make that $2.99. And let's just check our balance. So $754.50. Ah, that's wrong as well. Oh, there's no sales tax on that. So we can add our sales tax to it. Great, save it. And rather than me have to kind of think about what I need to check to make sure this matches, I can then make use of the other automation that we used as part of our unattended automation to match the invoice. So that's going to go back in now and check to see whether what we've got from the invoice now matches the purchase order. Apply the rules that I've forgotten, and it's done it successfully, right? Great, and that's been removed from my list. So I no longer have to kind of go through the whole rigmarole of navigating, remembering what I need to check, etc. That's all baked into my digital assistant for me. So that's a kind of good use of both of those kind of unattended and attended automations. So I'm just going to skip back to my presentation. Bear with me. Okay, so before I hand back to Brack, I just want to kind of do a bit of a recap, just so that it's ingrained in everybody's head. So using our unattended digital worker, we use the kind of intelligent document processing to interpret and extract data from invoices. And then using sort of conventional robotic process automation, we're able to orchestrate that entire process. That's things like monitoring the inbox for invoices coming in, or emails with invoices coming in, interacting with our ERP system, and matching and categorizing invoices based on predefined business rules. And then our kind of attended use case, or our digital assistant, that gave us kind of a consolidated view of the exceptions that occurred during the matching process. Importantly, we reused existing automations to assist the user with the navigation and matching. So, we've already created these automations and we're using those in an unattended use case, but why not use those in an attended one as well? We've got all that good stuff already. And probably most importantly, it orchestrates the handoffs, or it orchestrates the handoffs between the robot and the user to make best use of the skills that each one of those different participants in the process sort of brings to it as a whole. So that's kind of my little demo for everybody. So I'm going to hand that back to David.
Thanks, Dan.
No problem.
The awkward moment where we're all pushing buttons, getting the screens to change. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Sure, Dan will be on the Slack channel as later today, as will I myself. So if you have any questions for either one of us, or indeed for our panelists, try to find us there. I'm just going to close maybe with a little bit of, I've talked to you about the current state of the market and the kind of challenges, the trends we see that are affecting the market. But maybe like, what's the future of the market? What's next for RPA? I mean, we had a question that was sort of along these lines, and maybe one way to frame it is, do you see RPA as a disruptive innovation for that sort of automation market, right? Are we right now at this kind of inflection point where we're the Netflix moment? Blockbuster in 2007 is still dominant, but you know, its card is already punched, as it were. You know, in 5 years it'll be bankrupt, and Netflix will be on its way to being, you know, a dominant force.
So we'll let this poll go for another couple seconds, Brack.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a little more, this poll's a little more contentious watching it go in progress than some of the other ones. So, while that poll's running, I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I mean, I'm not an expert in disruptive innovation. I've read The Innovator's Dilemma, like probably most of you have. So I went and found an expert. So these points, Michelle Weiss, she's a senior researcher at the Clayton Christensen Institute. He's the guy who invented disruptive innovation. He ran the institute until he died earlier this year. She identified 6 telltale signs of how you can tell if a market is undergoing disruption. Again, I want to be important to emphasize that when I'm talking about RPA being a disruptive innovation, I'm not talking about it being a disruptive innovation for your business. It may or may not be for your business, depending on how you deploy it. In this context, I'm talking about, is it disruptive for the automation market? The existing incumbent vendors, those guys in the flow center of gravity, the existing sort of decision guys, even the existing other task automations. Where, you know, where is the, are they going to be disrupted? Are their business models going to be disrupted going forward by these RPA vendors? And I think the poll results, you can probably see them there.
Exactly.
It's pretty close to a 50-50 split, so 46%. So.
Yeah, and Robert over in the chat had a good point that RPA is no longer disruptive, but digital workers are disruptive. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. We've got, you know, the boundaries of these technologies is one of the things, as I said at the beginning, is changing fast. So the first telltale sign that of disruptive innovation, Michelle Weiss has, is they target people who are non-consumers or overserved by existing products. I think certainly you see that in RPA, right? I mean, RPA is it's getting acquired by smaller types of organizations and in divisions that could never afford a workflow solution or to make an investment in a full-blown ticketing system. Even we see RPA being adopted even you know, if you think about that flow box, you know, you have cloud vendors like ServiceNow who are bringing you know, and even new pricing models in the existing incumbents like Pega and IBM, Appian, who are bringing workflow and case management technology, flow technology, down to a per user pricing, making it more accessible for the masses. And even given that, you still see RPA coming into the market underneath them. You see RPA being adopted in verticals which are outside of the traditional verticals for flow technology, which really were mostly adopted around public sector, banking, insurance. Actually, probably in reverse, banking, insurance, then public sector. So that, you know, that's already interesting. It's certainly bringing it in. RPA from this signs feels like it could be disruptive for that market. The innovation that RPA brings is not as good as existing products as judged by historical measures of performance. I mean, this is probably the absolutely true. Certainly, if you go back 5 years, you know, almost all of the workflow and automation vendors were completely dismissive of RPA. And judged by historical measures of performance, you know, again, around that flow vendor center of gravity, the historical measures of performance are, is it increasing the end-to-end performance of the entire value chain? Workflow technologies are designed around hitting those SLAs. But you know, RPA is not focused on hitting the SLA across your whole value chain. It's focused on automating and saving you time and effort in one step of the process. Judged by historical measure of performance, the way those flow vendors are framing the automation space, framing their market positioning, definitely RPA was not considered to be as good as those products. Simpler, more convenient, more affordable. I mean, again, this could be slightly controversial. I've given it the green tick. I think, we do see it being adopted. I mean, I was at an RPA networking event last year, and I was talking to a guy who ran a chain of funeral homes and was a really successful, a really happy RPA UiPath customer. And those aren't the kind of use cases. I mean, and he didn't go out and get an expensive consultancy. He bought the software and he implemented it himself. He had only like 3 or 4 bucks, but he was super excited about it, and happy. Those are never customers you'd see around flow automation use cases, right? Is a technology enabler that can carry the new value proposition up market. I mean, certainly Dan demonstrated, I talked about sort of how AI is coming into the RPA space. The RPA vendors are picking up that technology. And I think, this is, I've given it the amber arrows, the maybe arrows. Yeah, I don't think it's clear that it's clear that the decision and flow use cases are becoming easier to implement. They're being moved closer to task. Those lines are being blurred between some of those categories, which were really good, stark differentiations 2-3 years ago. They're being blurred a bit today by the way the technology is developing. What's not clear about this is whether RPA is going to be the winner, right? On sort of these things like intelligent data document processing, it's not obvious that UiPath Document Comprehend, Blue Prism, AA's tooling is going to be the best tooling on the market, or whether the technology that AWS or Azure brings out, or IBM Watson brings out, or something else allows you to, or one of the legacy data, like data and scanning processors become better. So while these lines are blurring and the way the technology is moving is changing, what's not clear about this is whether RPA is going to win from that market disruption. Is the technology paired to the business model? So again, this is Netflix being the banner of this. They first moved DVDs. You don't have to go to the store. They mailed them to you, then went to streaming, right? Is there a business model innovation that allows you to move, I mean, inside that Netflix Blockbuster example, even when they were mailing you a DVD, they were doing it with a subscription business model, as opposed to you buy for every DVD you rent, like Blockbuster did it. And I give this the Red Cross. I mean, when you look at the RPA industry, the commercial models tend to be more term license than perpetual licenses, and some of the other areas of enterprise software. But they're enterprise software business model, right? You're buying a piece of enterprise software. You can, within an existing model, there's not much inside there that strikes me as being a sustainable business model innovation that changes the way, that's going to change the way other pieces of this technology are acquired. And the existing providers are motivated to ignore the new innovation, and they're not threatened by it. Again, I mean, that's certainly what we saw going back. I mean, the only existing flow vendor that really went out and got and brought RPA into their product portfolio at a very early stage was Pega. They acquired OpenSpan in April 2016, and it's been a sort of a key pillar for their strategy. They, other than that OpenSpan acquisition, by and large, they let the RPA vendors grow to a point where they were probably too big and too well funded to buy them, and then ended up partnering with them. And now in the current world, and sort of something, if you read about this space, this is again a graphic from the Everest Group. You now see the incumbents in that flow technology, the area of the market that's potentially a target, being disrupted. You see them now going out and acquiring almost defensively. So you see quite a good wave of acquisitions in the RPA space over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. And again, Highland being sort of a known but sort of a not big name RPA or BPM vendor not only bought Another Monday, but also bought Alfresco, so a document management system. So you see even within the flow space, you see more consolidation being driven. So that's sort of, and so I mean, from that scorecard, I guess, there's not a clear answer that says, yes, this is absolutely disruptive innovation, all of the automation space. It's obviously too early to tell, and I don't have a crystal ball. But I think there's enough signs, there's enough indications sort of in this graph that RPA is certainly going to change the market, right? A lot of the technology innovation, a lot of the fast moving pieces, the fast growing piece of the market is around this task in this RPA space. And that means it's important, right? Even if it proves out in 5 years that it's not a proper disruptive innovation as Clayton Christensen and the academics define it, it's still an important space as business and organization leaders that we need to look at, we need to be aware of, we need to understand. And so I've talked a lot about the theory, the market dynamics, but maybe I wanted to leave you with a couple final thoughts about how to get started, right? So, or if you are started, maybe some ideas about where to go. Like, what is all this categorization? What does this marketing big picture mean? And the first thing I'd say is, and we've mentioned this throughout, the pandemic makes automation more important. I mean, this is from Horses for Sources, a graphic. It comes from sort of an earlier stage of the pandemic, but still, I mean, the most recent research that we're publishing looks, and the follow-up surveys look pretty much like this. Process automation is one of the spaces where they really expect, people are expecting 54% to increase their investment, including the RPA space. 38% are holding their investment. So even in these troubled times, with all the economic uncertainty that 2020 has brought us all in our business, automation is a space where people are increasing or doubling their bets, are expecting to in this year. So how do you do that? Well, the first thing, I have a customer, they famously told me one time, he wants to remain nameless, but said, we're agile in development, but waterfall and everything else. And the first thing I'd say from a BP3 perspective is you need to be agile in discovery. So you need to be agile in the way you think about your use cases, how you find your use cases. If your development model, if RPA lets you build bots in weeks, some of the panelists were talking about getting bots live in days when they had changing regulatory circumstances. If finding use cases and getting bots approved for development takes you months, then you're not getting the business agility, you're not getting the business outcomes, you're not getting the speed that you need to be getting. So this model is designed to help you find a faster way to get that done. How do you do it? It's not, it's the rigorous application of common sense. It's got a couple of pieces which I think are, I'll call out, which I think are important nuances. Identify the opportunities. How do you do it? You have meetings with stakeholders, old school, right? Process discovery. You look at data and you get a list. Just put them all in a spreadsheet. Create an opportunity register. You can see it in the upper right there. And then just go through and assess the business value. You can do it old-fashioned style, post-it notes. Ask the business stakeholders what the biggest and most exciting opportunities are, high, medium, and low, and put them in rank order. When you have them in rank order, categorize them. So is it a task automation? Is it a flow estimate? If you think it's and that categorization step, first of all, starts to tell you what kind of technology you can use to solve the problem. But the second thing is, what you'll find is that you'll come up with a use case and you'll want to write their hybrid because it's more than one kind of tech. It's more than one automation. And if it's hybrid, it probably means you can break it down into two use cases and you can make separate investment decisions on both of them. And that's sort of an important way of decomposing the big problems, making them smaller problems so you can solve them fast. And you can get more agile all the way through your process. The third step is absolutely critical. So when you go through the second step, assess the business value, take the top 2 or 3 use cases. And when you find the top 2 or 3 use cases, model them out. Don't model them in minute detail. Model them, time box it at 2 to 4 hours, one person with an SME. At the back of it, have a process model. This is such an important step, right? Because the process model, when you are using RPA, using any type of automation, what you're doing is applying technology to a people process. By modeling the opportunity at that high level, getting that quick view, You can build scope, so you can have business and IT agree consensus. This is what we're going to invest in. It can show you all the downstream and upstream implications. So this notion in the questions, are we bottlenecking the downstream step? Are we in danger of doing that? If you model the opportunities, you'll be able to figure it out. And finally, when you model the opportunities, your IT team, your automation developers, BP3, we can come in and we can give you a high, medium, low probably implementation complexity. And so we run this and then look at the results on this implementation complexity and decide. We've done really quick high wins. We've done, after we run this cycle, and in 1 week we try to come out with 5 or 6 use cases that were identified by the business as being high business value, and we've tried to modeled them and told you whether they're high, medium, and low implementation complexity. In a week, you can get to that meeting. You can have a second meeting and say, this is what we found. Do you want us to go for, to validate the business case and to go for a dev estimate on these top use cases? Or do you want us to go look at 5 new use cases? And this pinwheel is a very easy way to think about and run use case identification, so you can find places for automation, narrow them down, categorize them, make sure they're tasks, make sure they're the right kind of tasks for RPA, and filter them down, get them in the green zone, and make the investments. Hopefully what it lets you do, or challenge you to do, is to be less waterfall in the way you find use cases, the way you think about making these decisions, and be able to get more agile about it. And the final guiding principle, I mean, this is the rigorous application of common sense. We're consultants at BP3, so we like a little bit of a 4x4 quadrant. Map your opportunities. When you're making the decision about where to make and what technology to invest in, map the quick win, map them on a matrix. Here I've put business value on the bottom, implementation complexity, and try to start with things in the green zone. And if things are in the red zone, I put the euphemism, use design thinking. I mean, really, come back Friday, have Andy Baziri's team help you redesign your enterprise experience. Because if you're looking at something in the red zone and you think you should be investing in it, it probably will never achieve the proper ROI the way you're framing the problem today. To make those investments in that red zone, you need to reframe the problem in a new way. And that's what design thinking is all about. Andy will talk to you about it on Friday. It's a really useful, I mean, this is a really simple visual. We find it really useful even when we come into customers and they're like, we have tons of use cases. Where do we start? We start by putting them on this matrix. And then that, a lot of times, the path becomes obvious. And that's all I have. There's some questions, I know. My final thought, I guess I'd leave you guys with is not every organization should adopt RPA. I hopefully gave you some ideas about market trends, use cases. Dan showed you the art of the possible. The panel talked to you about their experience, where they're getting success and their challenges. But given the trends and the growth and the kind of investment that's flowing into the RPA part of the automation space, given the importance and the number of automation investments that your competitors are talking about making in the market, I would certainly say that not every organization should adopt RPA, but every organization should understand why they have or haven't, right? If you aren't looking at it and understanding these technology dynamics, what RPA is doing for your competitors, what it could do for you, you probably need to think about that and where you fit in the market. Thank you, and I guess I'm happy to hang out for more questions. Krista, I don't know.
Yeah, so there's a good question that came in about your assessing business value. Is there good practices for doing that? Do you have good practices for assessing and accessing that business value?
So when we go in and assess the business value matrix as BP3, what I tend to lead with is what is your organization's business objectives? How do they assess business value, and what do they think is important? What I'd say is, around an RPA investment, an RPA investment decision or finding RPA use cases is not going to be about strategic realignment of your whole business. If you need, we have people, certainly we can talk to you about how to realign your target operating models and how to do the end-to-end value chain flow. But really, when we do most of that business case analysis, we start with the way you think about business cases. So we'll start with guided questions. Are you looking to adopt RPA because you have regulatory and compliance problems? Are you looking to automate looking at automation because you're missing SLAs. Do you just have too much headcount in your office, in one of your offices, and you want to retrain them and move them? Do you have growth? Is your revenue line growing strongly, but you want to hold your headcount constant in your strategic plan? And based on those things, we'll be able to work backwards. Again, to what kinds of metrics and what kinds of things, what kinds of automation investments are going to be right for you.
Okay. The last question we got was about open text. So this was with regards to your timeline.
Definitely place open text in this space. I mean, they bought basically every .NET vendor in the Flow space. And consolidated them. They haven't consolidated the technology, but they've consolidated them all under the OpenText brand, I think. So yeah, I mean, they're definitely a Flow vendor. Most of the ECM document management work systems have workflow that let them operate in the Flow space as well. So.
Well, I'll just plug, if you have questions, there is some discussion happening over in the Robotic Process Automation Day 2 Slack organization, if you want to go check that out. If you have any questions, feel free to email them to me. Also, we put the free Driven t-shirt link right here in the chat. Go register for your free Driven t-shirt. Those will come out in just a few weeks and they'll be sent directly to your home. So thank you, Brack, today for going through everything. I think there was some overwhelmingly great response. Do you have any last words before we head out?
No, thanks everyone for coming, and really thanks to our panelists and Dan. I mean, as I said, doing a live demo is brave, and I mean, the panelists really they've got the stories that we all want to hear, so it's really great to have them here.
Yeah, so thank you to all of our panelists. And Brack, we will see you guys tomorrow for Process Automation with Scott Francis as our host. Big day.
Thanks.